The current industrial approach to agriculture and food systems continues to build gender disparities in the farming and food sectors, with increased domination of men at the expense of women participation in these two crucial sectors. Women continue to play a big role in Kenya's food and farming systems, despite the fact that the current model does not adequately recognize their contribution in production, value addition, and processing of food. Most of the work done by women is not economically rewarded, as it is considered subsistence and mainly falls under the social gender roles and responsibilities of women. Agricultural activities in which women are involved are often categorized as domestic work and therefore are not accounted for. And we see most private and public sectors investing so much in this type of agriculture, the industrial approach, which continues to widen this gap.
Are you wondering how you can learn more about food? Well, you're in the right place. This is the Chakula podcast, brought to you by the Root to Food Initiative, a show that celebrates authentic Kenyan dishes and serves you hot conversations about food in Kenya from an economic, social, and political lens. Sema nasi kwenye social media at Root to Food on Instagram, at Root to Food on Twitter, and Root to Food on Facebook. And now, here's your host, Felistas Mwalia.
The alternative approach to this industrial agriculture, which leaves women behind, is agroecology, which offers a great opportunity to not only enhance participation of women in food and agricultural sectors, but also optimize on the gains of a more gender-inclusive approach to farming and food systems. It rewards knowledge, innovation, and skills, therefore onboarding otherwise sidelined groups in the society. Through more decentralized food and farming systems, agroecology enhances self-determination of communities, encouraging use of locally available resources. It also enhances active and more meaningful participation of women in food systems. Today, I'm very fortunate to be hosting Leonida Odogo, who's a feminist. She's also at the forefront championing for sustainable food systems in Kenya. Karibu sana, Leonida.
Thank you very much for having me.
She'll be talking to us today on food systems and where women are in this space. Probably, Leonida, to start us off, you can tell us from a grassroots perspective, where are women in the food system?
One thing is that women are the bulk of food producers, not only in Kenya, but in Africa and the world at large. And then, of course, women are the majority of those who are employed in food production. But sadly, their participation is not meaningful as it should be, because you find that in policy spaces, it's only men who control. And of course, when we talk about policy documents, they determine, for example, allocation of resources. And the fact that women are not present in policy spaces, it means that when agricultural resources are being allocated, they are not there. And then another sad trend is the fact that food is gendered. It's divided into male and female. For example, you find that subsistence food, for instance, the cassava, the millet, those are presumed to be women products. And you see that when you go selling such, even what you get from the market is not much. And crops, for example, coffee, are mostly controlled by men. So that's where also the gender divide comes in as far as economics is concerned. Another challenge that women face is a lack of capacity and access to information. Because one, they are too much engaged in care work, and they don't get to have access to information. For example, within the African system, and Kenya included, you find that information is disseminated, for example, at the Chief's Baraza. How many women will you find at the Chief's Baraza, for example, at 10 when discussions are being held, or maybe when budget processes are being discussed at local level? Many a times you'll not find them there. Maybe they've gone to the market and things like that. Another challenge is the aspect of middlemen, and middlemen are responsible for exploiting women. You find that, for example, they come by farm produce where the women are, and they transport them to the cities and towns, and the price that they've bought it at the local market in the village is very different from the price at which it's sold. They always put a markup in terms of when they are selling, and they end up getting more compared to what the women at the rural level gets. And another issue is the aspect of control of productive resources, of which land is key. You find that women, many at times, the title deeds is always in the name of men. Or if, for example, the woman is widowed, it's in the name of the son. And this means that women only have user roles within user rights within land. They don't have transfer rights.
Yeah.
Because for you to transfer, for example, let's say you want to expand on your land production, maybe you need to get money, and if the title deed is not in your name, then you cannot go to a bank and use that land as collateral.
Yeah.
So that also, pushes women to the brink of poverty.
Maybe to also mention something on land. Last week we had an interesting discussion with my colleague Emmanuel. I'll link the episode to that podcast on the show notes below, whereby he also mentioned on the struggle of accessing land and how the problem of accessing land can also lead a farmer or an individual not to choose sustainable ways because it's just a land that you're leasing. So you just want to maximize on profits.
Yes, as I said, if you're talking about food sovereignty, we need to talk about land, because everything that we produce, we get it from the soil, and this soil and land are related. So if women are not able to control land, there can never be food sovereignty.
Leonida, you've mentioned some of the challenges that women face in the food systems, and I believe you work closely with communities. And as the executive director of Haki Nawiri, which is an organization working with communities, trying to empower communities, also trying to work on social justices, what are you doing in your space or in your capacity to ensure that the voices of women are recognized, the work that women are doing in the food system is also recognized?
At Haki Nawiri Africa, we have 4 broad pillars. We have gender justice, climate justice, food justice, and youth engagement. Specifically on food, we link it up with the gender justice pillar, as well as food justice, but also climate justice, because there's a direct relationship between climate change and food production, especially because in Kenya, as in the rest of Africa, we depend on rain-fed agriculture. To specifically talk about agroecology and creating spaces for women to engage, first of all, in terms of capacity building, but also to have space where they are safe and can speak about control of resources. They can have access to information. They can also have their voices heard. Is that specifically we selected rural communities because, one, majority of Kenyans live in the rural areas, and that's where the bulk of the food that is consumed in towns and cities comes from. So if rural communities are not empowered, then it means that our food is going to be disrupted.
In terms of rural communities, are you working with women exclusively, or is it just a combination of both men and women?
It's a combination of both men and women, but specifically in the project that we are running with the Heinrich Ball Foundation, we are working with women. And part of the reason is that we want to respond to the exclusion and marginalization of women when you talk about food production and the food and the value chain. So we are coming in, first of all, to do capacity building and, of course, to make women be politically conscious about food production. Because when you talk about politics, it's the allocation of resources, but it's also who gets what, when, and how. So we want women to have space where they can champion their issues, but also bring them together to form a movement such that when they push their case or they push their issues, they are pushing it from an informed perspective, first of all, because they're conscious, but also they're banking on the numbers as a people, so that when they say that we want this as a group of women that is huge, they can be listened to as opposed to championing on your own as a lone ranger.
You mentioned that you're working on a project on agroecology and food justice project, which is also supported by the Root to Food Initiative and the Heinrich Ball Foundation. Probably you can just let the listeners know, why did you decide agroecology and food justice? And you can also mention which counties you're working in.
The project is on agroecology, and this is because, one, agroecology is a movement, is a science, it's also a practice. So with agroecology, we started it in order to respond to existing gaps within the community, because one, you find that women don't get to make decisions. So with agroecology, they're able to come together, they're able to voice their issues, which are listened to, and we can champion them through the Root to Food Initiative as policy advocacy issues at the national level. Another reason that we specifically came up with agroecology was to respond to the lack of alternatives in terms of, for example, pesticide use, because what we know is that agrovets are becoming stores for rural communities to go and get seeds and also to get pesticides. And sometimes you find that these pesticides are not regulated. But when you come up with agroecology as a form of food production, it uses locally available resources. So the farmer's footprints to the agrovet is actually minimized. And the farmer can use the resources that are available. For example, the green matter to make compost. They can use grass to make mulch, and they can use, for example, if a farmer has a neem tree, they can use that to make biopesticides, which actually, when you look at it in terms of the cost, it's very cheap for the farmer to do that.
Probably what you're trying to say is that agroecology therefore can be seen as an opportunity and a framework in which women can transform the economy and society.
Yes, it's very possible, because right now everybody's becoming conscious about the type of food they eat.
Yeah.
You've seen the World Food Report, the 2021, is saying that the number of obese people is increasing and the world hunger is also increasing.
Yeah.
And sadly, we're also having the challenge of climate change. And agroecology as a practice can be able to address some of the challenges brought about by climate change. For example, when farmers grow indigenous seed varieties, despite the fact that there are changes in weather conditions, they can actually make a harvest out of that, as opposed to using industrial seeds, which have to depend on chemicals at the entire food production process, and which is very costly for farmers.
Yeah. Leonida, back to your project, what has been the uptake? How have the women farmers in Machakos taken up the project? Are they really transitioning from conventional approach to embracing agroecology?
Yes, as I said before, agroecology is about a practice. So what's happening is that we do political and technical education. When you do the technical education aspect, you're actually training the farmers on how to do it. For example, if we do soil testing, that is when we're having a tafakari, which is Kiswahili for reflection, we do soil testing. Every farmer comes with a glass of soil from their homestead. And in soil testing, we do what we call ribbon test to assess the texture of the soil. We look at presence of microorganisms, for example, earthworms. We look at presence, for example, of roots, green matter, dry matter on the soil. So the more green matter or living matter you have on your soil, it means that your soil has life.
Yeah.
And the more nutrients it has. But then if your soil doesn't have any earthworms, it means that it is toxic and actually there's no life. And with agroecology, it's about bringing life back that has been lost. And with the different practices that we do, we also enhance farmers to, encourage farmers to start having seed banks. Because when you have indigenous seeds, even the taste of food is natural, as opposed to food that has been corrupted through an industrial system. And being conscious about the food that you eat also has implications for how your food is produced. So with agroecology, using natural methods, it means that the food that comes out of your land is actually healthy food that you are sure of. And of course, the other aspect is that as a consumer, you know where your food comes from, as opposed to just buying food where you don't know how it was produced. With agroecology, it actually builds a relationship between the consumer and the producer.
Back to women, how does agroecology onboard women?
One is it provides them with access to ready information. For example, as I said, when we're doing our reflections during the Tafakari forums, we ask the farmers, what inputs do you use on your soil? And many of them tell you of the different pesticides, different chemicals that they use on the soil. And then you ask them about the yield. And then we go through like a historiography. How long have you been farming? You find that maybe one person has been farming for 30 years, 20 years, 10 years, 5 years. And then you ask them, what changes have you noticed? And the bulk of the response is always that the yield is different. The yield is becoming less. The soil is becoming harder. And so with the skills training, we try to remedy those problems. And that's part of the reason why I said every farmer comes with a glass of soil, which is actually a representation of their farm. And when you take them through soil testing, you take them through presence of microorganisms, and you also check them through a process called water retention capacity. How much water can a glass of soil retain? Because water is very essential when you're talking about food production, for instance, on photosynthesis. And if your soil cannot hold water, it means that the soil is loose. And if your soil is loose, it means that if there is rain, the soil will be, there'll be soil erosion. If there's wind, the topsoil will be carried away. And as we all know, the most important soil for a farmer is the topsoil. So if the farmer cannot take good care of their topsoil, it means that they're not going to be producing good food. And that's why now we're championing for agroecology, especially amongst women. The reason being that women are the bulk of food producers. Women are the bulk of those who are employed in the agricultural workforce. Agroecology also is relevant because the bulk of food producers are women. And of course, women are custodians of local knowledge. And if you look at seeds, women are the majority of those who save seeds. And we know that seed is essential for life. Seed is essential for food production. Seed is also a cultural heritage because you find that many communities, like when you're getting married, many a times you're always given seed to symbolize that you're starting a new life, but also it's important for continuity in terms of like you're going to a new homestead and you'll need food to be sustainable. That's why it's very important to empower women because they are the producers of food.
Leonida, besides production, is Haki Nawiri doing something at a policy angle in regards to onboarding women in the food systems and basically onboarding women on sustainable practices like agroecology, pushing for policies?
Yes, Haki Nawiri is part of the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa. And part of what we've been pushing is, one, women voices as far as food production is concerned, but also given this is very recent, the African Union was pushing for harmonization of legislations around seed. And we were part of that process in terms of voicing our concern in that this was in essence going to commercialize indigenous seeds and continue to marginalize farmers. And as we know, majority of people who take care of seeds are women. So when these legislations come in, it means that they're going to continue marginalizing women in terms of seed and of course food production, because food comes from seed. And in addition, we've also been participating in countering the UNFSS process, and we've had sessions where we bring in women voices and link that to corporate capture. For example, when you talk about research in agriculture in the Kenyan context, you find that funding for research goes to conventional agriculture. If you talk about education, the education system is promoting conventional agriculture. So the question is where we bring up debates and we link up not only women in Kenya but women in other parts of the world to bring in their issues, and through that, we're able to come up with best practices. And many a times we use social media when we're having this conversation. So the information reaches out to as many people as possible. And we also target, for example, through Twitter, we target specific policy makers. We've had an instance where we were talking about corporate capture of food, and you're able to tag the special rapporteur on right to food, which is very key in terms of like bringing local issues to an international arena.
Thank you for sharing that, Leonida. And I'm also a believer that everyone needs to be involved in discussion around food matters, and we need an approach, or basically an alternative approach to industrial agriculture. And you've talked so much about agroecology, and I also believe that's the solution. But how will agroecology enable women have a voice in decision-making in food systems?
Agroecology, first of all, it's a movement. And when you talk about movement, it's not one person, it's a group of people coming together.
So it's a practice?
It's a practice, it's a science, and it's also a movement. So when you bring women together as a group, as a collective, they're able to voice issues collectively, as opposed to when you talk about an issue that is disturbing you as an individual. When you organize in silos, it becomes problematic. So when you bring women together, first of all, they become more conscious and they become a force. And another thing is through agroecology, women get trained, they have the capacity, the knowledge and the skills, and they can end up becoming community agroecology champions within their communities.
Probably you can break it down to the listeners, because we've been mentioning agroecology since the beginning. You can just break it down, besides it being a science, a movement, and a practice. What is agroecology?
Agroecology is a method of food production that works in tandem with the local environment. For example, if you're a farmer, you have to understand your farm. You have to have a relationship with your land. For example, understanding the type of soil you have, understanding the terrain, the topography, understanding, for example, the type of, for instance, trees that you can grow on that particular land. Because you find that some crops can grow in one region but cannot grow in others. So with agroecology, it's about understanding your environment and growing food that do not harm the environment. It's also about using natural resources and reducing your footprints to external resources as much as possible.
So does it mean that agroecology, now that you're talking about decision making, that basically it moves beyond solving the issues at the farm level, but also at the broader level? The social injustices, not necessarily from a farm level, but also...
Because with agroecology, as I said, when you bring in the movement aspect, farmers or producers come together. And when they come together, there's an exchange of knowledge and there's also an exchange of experiences. And when issues can be brought and discussions around these issues be raised, and that way you can be able to push them. For example, as I said, if you come together, it's not easy to ignore you if you're a group. Let's say, for example, we have, like in Machakos, in Muvuti, where we're having this project, it's a group of 300 women. If, for example, you're championing something as one person, and on this other side there are 300, a group of 300 women, listening to a group of 300 women becomes more apparent compared to listening to a group, just one person. So with agroecology, what it does in terms of giving voice is that it helps to build collectives. And it also helps to build consciousness so that, one, you're conscious about what you're producing, you're conscious about how you produce it, and also you have the knowledge to say no. For example, when agrovets come to your farm and tell you to use chemicals, because you have the knowledge, you're able to criticize and you're able to say this is not working. But if you don't have the knowledge, it means that anything you're given, everything you're told, you're going to be taking it as gospel.
And maybe to add on that, even push the government to support sustainable food practices.
Yes.
Back to the project that you're doing in Machakos, Leonida. 10 years, not even 10 years, 10 years is a lot. Now that you've already started with the Tafakari forums, are you already done with the Tafakari forums in Machakos? And basically, what's the plan after those forums?
One thing is that when you do the Tafakari forums, as I said before, it looks at the entire food production process. Soil, seed, care for crops, harvest, post-harvest, and value addition. And of course, it also brings in the aspect of engaging the local government and also the county government in terms of raising issues as they happen, because sometimes things are happening and sometimes they may not be aware of things that are happening, or they may decide to ignore. So it actually brings in connectivity between rural women and the local government officials. And what we plan to do is either we'll invite them to the women's spaces so that they can listen to the women's voices, but also we are going to look at having them visit women in their homestead so that they can actually see what the women are doing. Because, for example, right now, the group we're working with, they have started doing composting on their farms, and this is going to be a remedy to the soil infertility. And number two, they've also started working on saving seeds, collecting the few seeds that they have, because you know that seed species are disappearing. The different seeds that they have, the indigenous ones, and also, of course, naming them, because what is happening is that with the push for industrial seed systems, indigenous seeds is always labeled as backward. And we had a session with the women asking them how many of them have granaries, and out of a group of 20 women, it's only one elderly woman who had a granary. And the emphasis was that if you don't have a granary, it means that your granary is the agrovet, which is quite disturbing as far as food is concerned.
During the Tafakari forums, what are some of the best practices that you've gotten from the communities that you're working with?
One is a return to indigenous practices, because they've realized that whenever they go and buy seeds from the agrovets, these seeds do not thrive. And from the last Tafakari that we had, they were sharing that they've been given specific instructions that don't go and replant these seeds. So it means that you're only using these seeds that you're getting from the agrovet just for one season. So one best practice is the realization that they need to go back to the indigenous seeds. And of course, the aspect of linking granary and seed sovereignty. If you don't have a granary, for example, in your homestead, it means that you don't have seed sovereignty, and it means that you don't have food sovereignty.
You can probably explain to the listeners the meaning of seed sovereignty and food sovereignty.
Seed sovereignty is the aspect of being able to control, first of all, to have seeds to be able to control the sources of the seeds and also to determine what you want to do with the seeds, because there are some seeds that are used for planting. There are some that are used for as food.
Basically, it's power. Is it power to...
Sovereignty is also about power, because like, for example, if you find when farmers go to the agrovet, they don't have the power to control the seeds. Whatever is sold in the agrovet is what they buy. And many a times when the seeds fail, they don't have any form of insurance. And a case scenario happened in Muvuti in 2016, where the farmers went to the agrovet, the entire village. They bought seeds and they were told that if these seeds don't grow, they don't germinate after a given period, call this number. And when they called the number, it was Teja wa nambari hapatikani. So it means that is actually a realization that we need to go back to our indigenous seeds, but also you have a lot of power when you can be able to control your own seeds and when you have them within your own household. And when you talk about food sovereignty, is about controlling your food. You find that the farmers grow the food, but they don't determine the prices. It's the middlemen who determine the prices, and they also don't control the food chain. So with the food sovereignty is them having the power to make decisions as far as what they grow is concerned, the distribution aspect, but also the aspect of markets.
We have so many organizations who work closely with farmers, and specifically women farmers, trying to train them on sustainable food production practices like agroecology. What is that one thing that is really distinct from other organizations that Haki Nawiri is doing?
What's distinct in terms of our practices, first of all, is the political aspect, because it helps to build consciousness and start making people think differently about how things are. And also, when you talk about politics of food, for instance, you start asking the hard questions. So it's not just about the government, for example, coming to give you fertilizers, but you start asking, are there any other alternatives, or must I use this fertilizer and be changed to, for instance, government sort of subsidies. And then number two, what makes us unique is the movement building aspect, building a collective amongst rural communities. What we see is that rural communities are often neglected. So for us, we go to where the problem is, bringing these women together and also pushing for their voices to be heard. So the distinctive aspect is the looking at food from a political angle as a political issue, but also looking at engaging women on movement building. And when we do movement building, we not only look at food as a standalone thing, but we look at intersectionality of food with other injustices. For example, you look at food and labor, food and distribution, food and resource allocation. So the movement aspect is very important in terms of bringing women together, but also building their collective consciousness and building their collective power.
I like in the final statement, and indeed, a movement symbolizes power. As we wind down, as a young feminist, and food is a basic right, would you also urge other feminists working or who are not championing for the realization of the right to food, will you also urge them to support agroecology or the realization of the human right to food?
Yes, that's very important, because when you talk about food is an international connector. Whether you are an African, you are an Asian, you're a European, you need to eat food. Whether you're rich or poor, living in the urban or rural areas, you need food. So there's an aspect of centrality of food, and that's why everybody needs to be concerned about what they eat and where the food comes from. And of course, with food, we can break the barriers of patriarchy, especially when you look at aspects to do with land as a productive resource when you talk about food production.
We've come to the end of the show. Thank you so much for your insights, Leonida, and thanks so much to our listeners for listening in. Until next time, kwaheri, asante.